Okay, good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning scripture study coming to you live from St. Francisville. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, and I want to wish everyone Chag Shavuot Sameach, a happy Shavuot, Pentecost as it's sometimes known, also known as Pentecost. Of course, this is on the standard Jewish calendar. Many, including myself, will accept the idea that the morrow after the Sabbath would be tomorrow. So Shavuot, whether you are celebrating Shavuot today or tomorrow, Chag Shavuot Sameach, and it is good to be here today. You know, it's customary on Shavuot because of the association with the giving of the Torah, Matan Torah, with the festival of Shavuot. We've talked about that on this day, the Ten Commandments are read. Well, we're going to do a one-up on that, if you will, meaning that for the last several weeks, we've been in a series on the 10 words. And so rather than go with a traditional class, as I would normally do on Shavuot, around the 10 words, we're just going to continue just as we have in the series that I'm currently doing. So the current series that I'm doing is on the 10 words. Most of you know this, but if you don't, you can find this particular document. It is a comparison chart of the 10 words as they are recorded in the books of Exodus and Deuteronomy. Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5. I have placed my translation of the Hebrew from Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 side by side so that as we work through this study, we can note similarities and differences and talk on this particular subject from the same page, if you will. So hopefully you have that, and I would appreciate it if one of my good friends and fellow Bible students out there would paste that link either from our website, unitedisrael.org, or from our Facebook group page where I've uploaded that document so that some of you can download that if you don't already have it. Now, I'm not going to be referencing it as frequently in this class because we're dealing with one word. As I did a couple of weeks ago, I'll work through the entire document. But it's still good to have. It's still good to study, and it's very important that you do so during this series. So again, we are now in class 6. We are still in word 1. So someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, and subsequently they've asked me in emails, how long do you think this series can last? And I just don't know because I want to go through very carefully. I want to deal with the words and phrases within the words. I want to look at them in a very close and careful manner so that we can ascertain what I would say is the original intent, the original meaning of these words. So this could last another 5 weeks. It could last a couple of months. Who knows? But I can tell you that I will not finish today. Last week, we were in word 1 as well. We talked about what I called the exclusivity of allegiance. The exclusivity of allegiance. And I dealt with a singular phrase, which I've translated in my translation as, "Know it will be to you other Elohim above my face." Typically translated, "You shall have no other gods before me." All right? So that's okay. It's an okay translation because ultimately the meaning that's being intended there is no other gods. Jehovah has already stated in the opening statement of the 10 words, I am Jehovah your Elohim who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of servants. Know it will be to you other Elohim above my face. So we've covered that. We've gotten to the point now where when we discuss that, we're ready to move forward. Now, we discussed in the light of this first commandment within the 10 words, this covenant that was between Jehovah and Israel, written on 2 tablets of stone with the finger of God, ideas from the ancient Near East and from the Hebrew Bible on the requirements for exclusivity of allegiance to Jehovah. If you recall, last week we talked about the terms monolatry, we talked about henotheism, and monotheism. Look, some of you are probably thinking, uh-oh, I already forgot that. So we're going to have a test. Take your papers out and get a pen and get ready. But we talked about these different terms, and what we ultimately came to at the conclusion of last week's class, I made it very clear that ultimately monotheism won out. Monotheism, remember, is the idea that there is only one God. Some people charge, a lot of academics claim that monotheism came in very late, that originally the idea was either monolatry or henotheism, both of which deal with the acceptance that there are other gods, but that the focus was on one, or that the permission to worship and serve was only one, even though the existence of other gods was not denied. In the biblical literature, particularly later, by the time you get to what we call Deutero-Isaiah, Second Isaiah as it's sometimes referred to in academic circles, when we talk about that time frame, the idea is very crystal clear. The prophets are putting forward the idea not of monolatry, not of henotheism, but of monotheism. Now, today we continue our study in Word 1. Specifically today, I want to deal with a commandment which is within Word 1 regarding the prohibition, or I should say the prohibitions, plural, on making, bowing down to, and serving what the Hebrew calls pesel. P-E-S-E-L, if you're writing the Hebrew in English characters. It's pei, samek, lamed. In the plural, it would be pesalim. So we're going to deal with today the commandments within Word 1 that focus specifically on the prohibition or the forbiddance of making, bowing down to or worshiping and serving whatever this pesel is. It's translated as idol. It's translated as idol. But the question becomes, what is an idol? I mean, people have a lot of ideas about what an idol is and what can we or what should we designate under the heading of idolatry. You know, people have all sorts of ideas. But I'm not so interested in the ideas that people have. What I am interested in is getting at the meaning. So the better question is not what is an idol, at least for the beginning part of my class. The question to me is not what's an idol, it's what is pesel. What does that word mean? Pei, samek, lamed. Because this command is specific. Or I should say these commands are specific. The commands, by the way, if you've forgotten this since last week, are communicated in the singular. So whenever in Word 1, anytime it says you or your, you shall not, and so forth and so on, it is communicated in the singular. So just like last week, I want you to receive it accordingly. I want you to think, this is speaking to me. everyone who hears my voice should take this very singularly. Because now that we're talking about pesel and the forbiddance or the prohibitions under that word, it's going to apply individually to all of you. And whatever a pesel is, pesel, the 10-word covenant forbids making them, bowing down or worshiping them, and serving them. Now, further in word 1, added or grouped or tied or linked with this idea of pesel is the added qualifying phrase. In every form, you'll see it in my translation. So let me read it again. No, you shall make for yourself an idol. I used the standard translation there. Every form that is in the heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, and that is in the waters beneath the earth, no, you shall bow down to them, and no, you shall serve them. And then it continues. So these are the prohibitions. Now, notice this phrase, every form that is in the heavens above, that is on the earth beneath, and the waters beneath the earth. Now, in Hebrew, where it talks about every form, that could be translated likeness, because the Hebrew there is terumah. Now, temunah, temunah, because the Hebrew there is sometimes translated as image, an image, a likeness, a form. Temunah, a representation, a semblance. The general term, again, is image, in every image. So you're not supposed to make, bow down to, worship, or serve a pesel and every form that is in. See, this is qualifying the word pesel. Now, let me take a minute and give a few comments on interpretation. Have you ever said, or have you ever heard someone say, well, you know, that's your interpretation. The Bible, everybody has their own understanding, their own interpretation, and Ross, that's what you say that it means, but, you know, different interpretations, different explanations are out there. Well, let me make it very clear. While that can be true, that there are many understandings, explanations, and interpretations, what I am doing in this class is I am trying very much to avoid introducing or imposing ideas onto the text which are not from the text. You see, what I tell people quite often is when I open my Bible, what I begin with is, this is what it says. It means what it says. The trick is to understand, based on context and other usage in the Bible, the linguistics and the cultural, what we should try to be doing is to understand within those parameters what was the original intended meaning. Because when people apply their interpretation, their explanation, and they're outside of the context, usages in the Bible, the linguistic, the cultural, that's when you get into problems. When you separate a word, a phrase, a concept from its original, authentic context, cultural, historical, linguistic, that's when you get into problems. Now, one other point on understanding these ancient texts. We often look for ways to understand how these ancient words apply now. And that's good. We should try to do that. But we have to be cautious about introducing or imposing ideas outside of the original intent when we're doing that. Because the truth is, some things you read may not have a modern application. Now, I know some people say, oh, I don't like that. I'm telling you that some of the things that are written herein don't really have a modern equivalent. So when that happens, people then begin to look for a close proximity, and then they make their associations. Sometimes I think that goes too far. So by imposing modern thoughts, definitions to an ancient text, often leads one to false assumptions, error, and wrong understanding. So what I want to do is push the understanding back into the ancient setting. I want us to hear it as this ancient people would have heard it, and to do our best to understand it the way they would understand it. Now, again, I've brought up several times, there are a lot of people who say, well, anything, this is the understanding that's often taught about idolatry. People will sometimes say, anything that you place above God is idolatry. And then they'll begin to list off some examples. If your love is of money, you can make money an idol. If you love a certain football team or a certain Netflix series, you can place that above God, and therefore that becomes your idol. Listen, anciently, that is not the case. We are talking about something very specific, and when people say the things that I just said, they are imposing an interpretation from the modern world onto an ancient setting. So again, we want to know, what is a pesel? What does it mean when it talks about a temunah, an image, a likeness? What does it mean when it prohibits us making, bowing down to, or worshiping, or serving a temunah or a pesel? So hopefully that clarifies a few things as we get into the class today, because we want to know the intended meaning of the text in front of us at all times. That's our goal. And by the way, we do have the tools at our disposal in most cases to get at the original meaning. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about the ancient Near East and idols and images and what were these. We know from both archaeology and from literary sources that in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in the land of Canaan, in antiquity, that worship, the worship of the people, often focused on images, on man-made, what we call the work of the hands. These idols. I mean, the word idol, I think people, as long as they're thinking of it in terms of a crafted image by the hands of a craftsman that is involved in the worship of the people, that's okay. Let's use the word idol. So, but in antiquity, worship is often around and utilizing images, idols. These were quite often made of wood and stone, the typical building blocks of these idols, if you will. They were chipped away, chopped, chipped, and formed and shaped into various images. They were often overlaid with metal and silver, gold, precious stones. At times, these objects were molten. The metal, the metallic substance, was heated and poured into a form, if you will, where it would then harden. They would clean it up, decorate it, bow down to it, and worship it. Often, these idols were in the care of a special cadre of religious experts, the priest, in these various cultures. Quite often, it was the priest. In fact, in most cases, now there are household gods as well, but in most cases, these idols were in the care of the priest, who cared for, attended, made sure they were in good order and appearance. They would bring them food and water and beautiful flowers and put them before the idol so that the freshness of the worship would be well attained, taken care of. They were often housed in temples, worship centers, generally behind the curtain of the sacred sanctum in these holy places. And they were generally off limits to the lay people. In other words, the only time that the lay people would see the gods, in most cases in the ancient Near East, there were certain festivals, if you will, certain events in which they would be brought into the public and paraded forth through the crowds. Sizes of these gods would vary, but generally they were depicted as being equivalent to the size of your average human. In other words, they weren't humongous, and you didn't have a little statue of a god that was 12 inches tall and humans were 6 inches. They were generally depicted not only in anthropomorphic shapes, they not only looked like humans generally, but they were in the shape of and in the same size. Most often, they were in human form. In fact, what scholars originally believe, a lot of times archaeologists had determined that certain figurines, if you will, certain images were idols, and later they made the determination that quite a few of these were not idols at all. In other words, they weren't worshipped as gods, but they were to represent human characters. We tend to think that they were all idols. But at times, they had, for the most part, human features with certain animalistic characteristics. They would have the face of a certain beast, a sort of a mixture of human and animal. At times, the idols would have the face of a given monarch. Many of these looked similar. If you're not an expert in this, you might not be able to tell if a certain idol was Baal or El, because it's not like they were generally distinguished by certain features. You didn't look at it and say, well, you know, that must be Baal because he's got those big earlobes. You didn't recognize the gods based on their physical features, because that was sort of generalistic. You know, it was pretty much the same from statue to statue. The way that scholars and archaeologists identify a certain god is often because of a certain symbol or an object, a weapon that was with that idol. In other words, whatever it was that identified in the minds of the worshiper, that's so-and-so God, that's the way they would be depicted when they would make them. Baal, for instance, would be, because he's the storm god, Baal would often be shown in images that we've recovered with an upraised arm grasping thunderbolts, because he's a storm god. So you see an idol holding a handful of thunderbolts, you go up, there you go, there's Baal, the storm god. At times, Baal, who is also associated with a bull, would be represented as a bull, or as riding on the back of a bull. Now, some suggest that these images technically were not worshiped. Some have proposed that the person, the worshiper, was really focusing on the image, but he really knew. In other words, these scholars will put forth the idea at times that says, you know, in the ancient world, it wasn't like they believed that that object was really the God. They didn't really believe that. They just kind of used it to focus. It's sort of what the Catholics will say today, is we don't really pray to the statue of Mary or whatever. It's just a way that we focus. It's the exact same way that some of these scholars excuse the idolatrous images in antiquity. So what I would ask is that a modern imposition that I spoke of earlier? In other words, is that true? What did the ancient world think about that object, that idol? Did they really believe that somehow it was the God or it embodied the God? And the answer to that is following. We have a few examples. For instance, there is an ancient Egyptian text. One of the things that I read this week was I used as a study basis earlier in the week. I opened up the Anchor Bible Dictionary, which is a very good academic resource, and I read on idols and idolatry. And this ancient Egyptian text is referenced in the article in Anchor Bible Dictionary on idolatry, and it says in this ancient Egyptian text, he placed the gods in their shrine. He settled their offerings. He established their shrines. He made their bodies according to their wishes. Thus the gods entered their bodies of wood, of stone, of clay. So this ancient text from Egypt suggests that the belief, at least according to this text, is that the God told the idol maker how he wished to be presented. Like if I were making an idol of myself or a statue, if someone said, you know, we're going to commission this brilliant sculptor to make a statue of you, Ross, how do you want it to look? And I'd say, well, I'd like it to be tall and handsome, chiseled, you know, like really good shape, a six-pack abs. You know, you'd begin to describe the way that you want to look for future generations. But what these gods are, what this text is saying is that the gods actually determined what that statue would look like, and then they would enter into this particular image, so that the image itself was not merely a representation of the God, but it became a place in which the God would dwell. Okay? Now, there's a relatively late Egyptian text that talks about the God descending, get this is late, descending as a bird from heaven and coming down as a bird from heaven onto the image of itself. So that's kind of interesting. There are other ancient Near Eastern texts which describe how to make the idol and then to bring it to life. So the understanding is that while the person is chipping away at the stone, while they are chopping away at the wood, they didn't believe that that was the God yet. They were building an image in which the God would dwell. Okay, I'll show you this. So they would first make it, as this Egyptian text says, and as other ancient Near Eastern texts suggest, the idol maker, the craftsman, is being told by the god how that should look. So he's working away at it. Then he does a magic ritual in which he brings in the god into the image. Now, this, by the way, is called a mouth opening or a mouth washing ceremony in the ancient world. This particular ceremony, called a mouth washing or a mouth opening ceremony, was performed by the maker in the idol shop. And this particular ritual was the manner by which, according to these ancient texts, the internal organs were made to function for the idol. If it's just the idol, if it's just a stone or a piece of wood, and no matter how much you decorate it, if it's not alive, what good is it? But according to these ideas, it was made alive by this incantation and this magical ritual that would bring life to the idol. There is an Akkadian text which says the following: without the mouth opening ceremony, this image cannot smell incense, eat food, or drink water. So the idea that's being conveyed in this Akkadian text is that if you just have the idol without the idol maker going through this ritual, then you got nothing. The idol is nothing. So in this setting, in this culture, what is it that the 10 words are pointing to? What is it that the 10 words are prohibiting based upon what we know from the ancient world? And by the way, and this is what we're really going to get into today, what was the view of the Hebrew prophets? Remember, they claimed to speak for and on behalf of Jehovah. Quite often these prophetic texts say, Ko Amar Yehovah, thus says Jehovah. So they're speaking for Jehovah, and they're talking specifically, as you'll see today, about idols and about the making of these idols. In fact, you'll see quite a few times that the Hebrew prophets are mocking these idol makers and their ideas. Remember now, I want you to understand that in the ancient world, according to my understanding, I don't believe that the ancient people just looked at these stone and wooden and molten objects and said, well, it's not really God, Ross. We just kind of like to focus on pretty statues while we're thinking about the unimaginable God. I think they were looking at these and they were bowing down and worshiping them, and I believe that they were serving these idols. You know, in the ancient world, we find this in the biblical text and other ancient Near East literary sources. When you would conquer an enemy, you'd steal their statue. You'd go in. We have the story of Dagon and so forth. You have stories where they would go in, an enemy would come in, and they'd steal your god, and they'd go bring it to their temple and put it in, like, face down in front of their god. Like, your God is bowing to their God. And I don't think this is make-believe. I think they actually believe the stories that the idol makers are bringing the spirit of their God, if you will, to use a phrase that just to make it clear, into this object. So again, the question becomes, in the ancient setting, what did it mean? What's God talking about? Is he talking just sort of generally about don't put anything over me, I should be at the top of your list? Or is he saying don't make one of these things. Now you might say, well, but there are other things in Scripture that would suggest, you're like, well, what I want you to do is work with me here. Let's deal specifically with this text at this time. So what I'm not saying, it's not good to put your football team over God, clearly, right? You're not to do that. But that's not what this is talking about. You've got other problems if that's your problem. But that's not what this is addressing. So again, we're going to read the commandments within Word 1 that deal specifically with the point that I want to make today. No, you shall make for yourself an idol. By the way, this is Exodus chapter 20 and verse 4, or Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 8. There's only one exception between the two. There's only one textual variant. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, it says, no, you shall make for yourself an idol and every form that is in the heaven above and that is on the earth beneath and that is in the waters beneath the earth. No, you shall bow down to them, and no, you shall serve them. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 8 says, no, you shall make for yourself an idol, every form. Exodus has and every form. Deuteronomy doesn't. In Hebrew, that's one letter difference. The point is the same. You are not to make for yourself, singular, a pestle, an idol. And also, it's almost parenthetical, and every form, temunah, an image, a likeness, that is in the heaven above, that in the earth beneath, in the waters beneath the earth, and you can't bow down to them and you can't serve them. So the question is, what is pestle? The root word, pe samic lamed, means to hew. To hew, H-E-W, into shape. And what I would do is put these words, if you're taking notes, think in terms of ancient tools. The word hew means to chip, like if you're dealing with stone, to chip. If you're dealing with wood, to chop or whittle. And to shape. You're taking, you ever hear of an artist, a sculptor, and you're looking at some beautiful statue that they made, and you say, how did you do that? And they say, well, I picture a beautiful woman, and I just take everything else off that's not that. I've heard people who are gifted at this kind of thing say that. That's what you're doing. You're hewing, you're bringing, by chipping away, by chopping away, by shaping a block into this object. Now, the root word occurs 59 times in the Hebrew Bible. Other words fall into a broader category of what the English idol or image it would fall under those in a broader way. Variously, these words are translated. Sometimes they indicate pouring, like maseka is a word that's associated with idolatry in a broader sense. Maseka has to do with pouring like molten liquid into a form. That's forbidden too. What I want to do, though, is as a main focus, I want to focus on the root word pe samic lamed, pesel. I want to focus on that. Now, because I'm talking also about every form and image and likeness, I'll bring in some texts that use other Hebrew words, But again, we're dealing with idolatry, and so we want to understand this from a biblical perspective. So here we go. Open your Bibles to the book of Exodus, Exodus chapter 20, Exodus chapter 20, and I want to read verse 23. Exodus 20, verse 23. Let's see. Nope, I got the wrong verse written down. 1 second. Let me make sure I've got that pulled up right. Let me look and see. It might be a difference in the English. Okay. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourself gods of gold. Nor shall you make gods of gold. Now again, the words here in Hebrew, the word pesel is not here, but it says, no, you shall make, plural, with me, et, Elohi kesef, gods of silver, and Elohe zahav, and gods of gold. No, you shall make them for you. So in other words, this particular idea broadens it a little more than what the 10 words do, but nonetheless, it deals with the making of these false gods. Now, if you go to Exodus chapter 34, Exodus chapter 34 and verse 17, thou shalt make thee no molten gods. In Hebrew, this particular Hebrew says, Elohe masecha, lo ta'aseh lecha. No, you shall basically make them for yourself. So, no molten gods. Go with me to Leviticus chapter 19. I want to go through a couple of these texts on the prohibition outside of the 10 words. And maybe expansions on the idea. If you look at verse 4 of Leviticus 19, turn not. In this particular passage, it's turn not. To idols, the word there is elilim, another word for idol. Turn not to idols, nor make for yourselves molten gods. I am Jehovah your God. Now again, molten gods is maseka. The idea of pouring a liquid into a form is the idea there. Look at Leviticus chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26 and verse 1. Leviticus 26 verse 1 says this. I am Jehovah your God. You shall make no idols, and nor shall you erect a carved idol or a pillar, nor shall you install a figured stone in your land to bow down upon it, for I am Jehovah your God. Now this particular passage contains quite a few words that deal with the broad category of idolatry. So if you look at the Hebrew there, you'll see that you're not to make for yourself, plural, elilim, which is a word generally translated as idols, upesel, that's our word that's in the 10 Commandments, matseva, which is generally a standing pillar. Like if you erect a pillar, a lot of times these are considered, at least by some authorities, to represent phallic symbols which are associated with reproduction and fertility. And you shall not cause them to stand up for you a stone. In other words, this passage rules out and brings in some of the key words that are associated with forbidden, sculptured worship. Worship associated with sculptured items. Now go with me to the book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 4, and I want to pick up verse 15. Deuteronomy 4 and verse 15. Take therefore good heed to yourself, for you saw no manner of form on the day that Jehovah spoke to you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you become corrupt and make a carved idol, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the waters beneath the earth. And lest thou lift up their eyes to heaven, thy eyes to heaven, and when thou seest the sun, the moon, the stars, all the host of heaven, you should be misled to worship them and serve them, which Jehovah your God has allotted to the nations under the whole heaven. But Jehovah has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be to him a people of inheritance, as you are this day. Now here's the idea. What Deuteronomy 4 verses 15 through 20 says, it's basing on what the 10 words say there. He's saying you're not to make any of these things, and it's very specific. Not in the likeness of a male or female, not in the likeness of any beast, not in the likeness of any bird, not in the likeness of any fish, not in the likeness. None of these things, because why? You didn't see a form at Sinai, at Horeb. You heard words. Now go with me to Deuteronomy 27. Deuteronomy 27. 27 and verse 15. Get ready for this. Cursed be the man that makes any carved or molten idol, an abomination to Jehovah, the work of the hands of a craftsman, and sets it up in secret. So here we have our word, pesel, which is forbidden, which is prohibited in the 10 words. And it says that if a man does this, if he makes one, he's cursed. Cursed be the man that makes, it's arur ha'ish asher ya'aseh pesel. Cursed be the man which makes a pesel or a masecha, poured like a molten image, the work of the hands of the craftsman. All right, so you do any of those things, you fall under the curse. Now I want to look at the prophets. I want to tell you how literal this is. So if you've been allegorizing, if you've been saying that other things can be an idol, if you're misinterpreting the words of the 10 words, you shouldn't have that problem after today. We're talking about something specific that is forbidden, that's prohibited. Now, go with me to the prophet Isaiah, what scholars call Deutero-Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 40. Most scholars look at Isaiah 40 through 66 and they say, if you read it, you will see within it certain clues that indicate that this is later than chapters 1 through 39. This is the academic view. And they'll say it is so different that a different author wrote it. But be that as it may, whether you accept that or not, we are in Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40, I want you to go with me to verse 17. Now remember, one of the things that's essential in studying Scripture, particularly prophetic text, is you have to recognize the white spaces, because often the white spaces will introduce a subject. I always think of it as snapshots, visions that the prophet sees that quite often don't tie in directly to the previous section of text. So beginning in verse 17 of Isaiah 40 is the beginning of a new section. They didn't have chapters and verses in the ancient world, but they had these white spaces. So here we go. Isaiah 40:17. All nations before him are as nothing, and they are counted to him less than nothing in vanity. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness will you compare to him? As for the image, a craftsman cast it, a refiner plates it with gold. This is a picture, by the way. This is like an ancient picture of what it really looked like. He's describing the making of an idol. A refiner plates it with gold. He forges silver chains. He that is too impoverished for such a gift chooses a tree that will not rot. He seeks to him a cunning workman to prepare a carved idol that shall not be moved. Do you not know? Do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he that sits upon the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are as grasshoppers, that stretches out the heavens as a curtain and spreads them out as a tent. That stretches out the heavens as a curtain and spreads them out as a tent to dwell in, that brings princes to nothing. He makes the judges of the earth as vanity. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely are they sown, scarcely has their stock taken root in the earth. He merely blows upon them and they wither, and the storm wind takes them away as stubble. White space. What Isaiah is saying, he starts off by saying, nothing can compare to God. If you were going to liken God to something, what would that be? And then he begins to talk about the way that people in his culture, in his time, have sought to make gods. Now look, if I pick up there, let me just read the next verse. To whom then will you liken me that I should be his equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high and behold who has created these things, that brings out their host by number. He calls them all by names because of the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. White space. Now here's what I want you to imagine. Here's what Jehovah is saying through Isaiah. You have to put yourself in the text. Let's say you're standing outside an idol shop and Isaiah's telling you what he said in your ear. Who would you liken me to? A craftsman takes a block of wood, he brings it to a refiner who coats it in gold. You're looking at it in the shop window. He says, now, look up at the heavens. The starkness of that needs to be impacting you right now. In other words, what he's saying is, do you really think that made this? Right? Now, we're going to continue. Go with me to 41, Isaiah 41. Isaiah, by the way, is giving glimpses of an idol. And we're going to read through those, and you're going to get a picture of what he's talking about. Isaiah 41:24 says this. Just a couple of glimpses here as we work our way through. Behold, you are of nothing, and your work of naught. An abomination is he that chooses you. Go down to verse 29. Behold, they are all vanity. Their works are nothing. Their molten idols are wind and confusion. wind and confusion. Go to 42, verse 17. Now again, I'm abbreviating this. I'm not reading every section within the white spaces, but I'm making a point, and I'll get to it. 42, 17. They shall be turned back. They shall be greatly ashamed that trust in carved idols, that say to molten images, you are our gods. In other words, the ones who trust in the pesel, that's our word from the 10 words, and those who say to the maseka, the molten image, you are our gods, guess what? Those will be turned back. They'll be greatly ashamed. Now look at chapter 44. Again, Isaiah is going to begin describing, I believe, a specific idol of his day. Listen to this. We're going to go with the white spaces here. I want you to go to verse 6, Isaiah 44 and verse 6. Thus says Jehovah, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, Jehovah of hosts. I am the first and I am the last, and besides me, there is no God. And who is like me? Let him proclaim it. Let him declare it. Let it set it in order for me from when I appointed the eternal people. Let them relate for themselves the things that will come and are to be. Fear not, neither be afraid. Have not I told you from that time and have declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there's no rock. I know not any. They that make a carved idol, there's our word, pesel, are all of them vanity, and the things they delight in do not profit. And their witnesses see not, nor know, that they may be ashamed. Who has fashioned a god or cast an idol? Get this, he's saying, who's making a god? Now watch this. It's profitable for nothing. Behold, all of his fellows shall be ashamed, and the workmen they are but men. Let them all be gathered together. Let them stand up. They shall fear. They're going to be ashamed together. The ironsmith makes an axe, and works in the coals, and fashions it with hammers, works it with the strength of his arm. If he's hungry, his strength fails. If he drinks no water, he's faint. In other words, the person that's making it, just a human. He's just a guy. The carpenter stretches out his rule. He marks it with a pencil. He fits it with chisels. He marks it out with the compass and makes it after the figure of a man. All right, so he's talking about a God that's in the shape of a man, according to the beauty of a man, that it may remain in the house. He hews down cedars and takes the pine and the oak. He strengthens for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a tree in the forest, and the rain nourishes it. Then shall it be for man for fuel, for he'll take of it to warm himself. Indeed, he kindles it, he bakes bread, or he makes a god. I want you to get this, what Isaiah is saying. He's like, your average guy, he's making gods on the side. If he gets hungry, he eats. If he gets thirsty, he drinks. He brings it to the carpenter. Carpenter draws out the shape of a man, and he's going to make something. He's going to make this god. I like that. He can use the wood to either warm himself, bake his bread, or if he wants to, he can make a god. He's talking about the futility, the utter stupidity of this. And he prostrates himself to it. He makes it a carved idol, bows himself down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. This half of it he eats meat. He roasts the roast, and he's satisfied. He warms himself and says, aha, I'm warm. I've seen the fire. And the rest of it he makes a god, his carved idol. He falls down to it, worships it, prays to it, and says, deliver me, for thou art my God. They have not known nor understood, for he has shut their eyes that they can't see, and their hearts that they cannot understand. And none considers in his heart, neither is there knowledge nor understanding to say, I burned half of it in the fire. I even bake my bread upon its embers. I've roasted meat and eaten it. And shall I make the rest of it an abomination? Shall I fall down to worship the stock of a tree? He feeds on ashes. A deceived heart has turned him aside, that he cannot deliver his soul, nor say, is there not a lie in my right hand? Isaiah's making fun of this. But he's saying it's blowing his mind that the person who has this idol, the person that makes it, can't realize that I just baked my bread, and this other half, I made my own God out of it. Now look at chapter 45, verse 20. Assemble yourselves and come, Isaiah 45, 20. Draw near together, you that are escaped of the nations. They have no knowledge, those that carry about their wooden carved idol and pray to a God that cannot save. Now look at chapter 46, verse 5. White space, 46, 5. To whom will you liken me and make me equal, and compare me that we may be like? They that scatter gold out of the bag and weigh silver in the balance and hire a goldsmith, and he makes it a god. They fall down, indeed they prostrate themselves. They bear him upon the shoulder. They carry him, set him in his place. He stands. From his place he can't move. Even if one cries out to him, he can't answer nor save him out of his trouble. White space. Chapter 48. Verse 3. I've declared the former things from the beginning, and they went out of my mouth, and I reported them. I did them suddenly, and they came to pass. Because I know that thou art obstinate, and thy neck is an iron sinew, and thy forehead brass. I've even from the beginning declared it to thee. Before it came to pass, I showed it thee, lest you should say, my idol has done them, and my carved idol and my molten image has commanded them. See, he's putting all those terms in there. You have heard, now see all this. Will you not declare it? I've shown thee new things from this time, hidden things which you didn't know. They are created now and not from the beginning, and from before this day you heard them not, lest thou shouldst say, behold, I knew that. You did hear, neither hear nor know, nor from of old was your ear opened, for I knew that you would deal very treacherously and was called a transgressor from birth. For my name's sake I will defer my anger, and for my praise will I refrain for thee, that I cut thee not off. Behold, I've refined thee, but not into silver. I've tried thee in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake will I do it. For how shall my name be profaned, and I will not give my glory to another. One of the biggest problems, and most obvious, is that when God's work is attributed to someone other than Jehovah, you see, he says, I will not share my glory with another. Now, Isaiah has described over and over in these texts an idol, if you will. It sounds to me, my understanding is that he's, first of all, what do we know? He is describing details known to him in his time of the making of an idol. He's obviously seen a carpenter stretching out a line and making the idol, carving it. He's seen the thing being carried to the goldsmith, the refiner, coating it with gold. And he is talking about that. The figure of a man, the beauty of a man, fastened it to a stump so that it wouldn't move. That sounds very familiar. The figure of a man fastened to a tree. Think about the idols. Go with me to Jeremiah 10. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1. Hear the word which Jehovah speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says Jehovah, learn not the way of the nations, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the nations are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vanity. A tree out of the forest is cut down, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver, with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. They are like a rigid post. They can't speak. They must needs be carried because they cannot walk. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. Neither is it in them to do good. Now, I've heard a lot of people say this is talking about a Christmas tree. It has absolutely nothing at all to do with a Christmas tree, nor does a Christmas tree have anything to do with this. I know some people want to believe that. We're talking about a specific idol from the ancient world. Now, that has manifested in various customs throughout the ages, so if someone wants to loosely link certain things, that's one thing. But now we get to a white space. Here we go, verse 6. For as much as there is none like thee, O Jehovah, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. Who would not fear thee, O King of the nations? For to thee is fitting. For among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there's none like thee. Stupid and senseless are they all. The teaching of their vain idols is but wood. Again, he says their gods are made out of wood. Beaten silver is brought from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the craftsman, and of the hands of the founder. Blue and purple is their clothing. They are all the work of skillful men. But Jehovah is the true God. He's the living God and an everlasting King. At His anger the earth shall tremble, and the nations shall not be able to abide His indignation. White space. Then it says, thus shall you say to them, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth, they shall perish from the earth and from under these heavens. Ultimately, all these other gods are going to be gone. I like the way that puts it. The gods that have not made the heavens and the earth. So here's what I want you to imagine. On one side, in our faith, we worship the God that made the heavens and the earth. And you can't represent that God by any idols. You can't make a representation of Him because you never have seen Him. All you have is words that you heard. So don't try it. It's not allowed. Now look, people can try to make this mean something else, but it's very specific. This word means don't make a god. It's not, you can't represent it. Let me keep going, verse 12. He has made the earth by His power. He's established the world by His wisdom and has stretched out, or literally planted the heavens by His understanding. When His voice resounds with the great mass of water in the heavens, and He raises vapors from the ends of the earth, when He makes lightning flash among the rain and brings forth the wind out of His storehouse, every man becomes stupid. Without knowledge, every founder is put to shame by his carved idol, for his molten image is a lie. And there is no breath in them. They are vanity, the work of delusion. In the time of their punishment they shall perish. The portion of Yaakov is not like them, for he is the former of all things, and Israel is the tribe of his inheritance. Jehovah of hosts is his name. Again, you have a God that created the heavens and the earth, and you have the stupid, made of wood, coated in gold and silver God that people focus on in their worship. For you, don't do that. Now that people go, well, I mean, these are good-hearted people and they mean right. Well, listen, that's what I'm saying. I'm not doubting that. But I'm not being quite as hard as Isaiah and Jeremiah by saying they're stupid, But what I do want to say is that Isaiah and Jeremiah says they're stupid, right? Clearly from the text, because that little statue or big statue made of, no matter how beautiful it is, if you think you should focus on it to worship the one true God, you're wrong. Stop it. You ought to drag any image that you're praying to or around out in the yard and burn it. I mean, I'm being honest here. This is what Deuteronomy says. I mean, make sure that you have a water hose and safety first, obviously. But don't pray to idols. Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51. By the way, I'm just going to give you these verses now that I think about it, because this is exactly what I just read in Jeremiah 10, 12 through 16. But if you write down the verses, Jeremiah 51, 15 through 19, it's pretty much the same. We're already here. He has made the earth, Jeremiah 51, 15, by His power. He's established the world by His wisdom. He stretched out the heavens by His understanding. When His voice resounds with great mass of water in the heavens, He raises vapors. Okay, so it is the same. I thought it was. 51, 15 through 19. The point being that Jehovah is the God that made the heavens and the earth, and other gods are stupid. Okay, go to the prophet Habakkuk. And what I want you to do is go to chapter 2, Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 18. What use is there in a carved idol? By the way, in Hebrew, mahoil pesel, ki peslu. What use is there in a pestle, and the hewer has fashioned it? A molten image, and a teacher of lies, that the maker should trust in his own manufacturer when he makes dumb idols. Prophets aren't holding back. They just say, look, it's stupid. Look in the window. I get that it's pretty. It's got silver and gold and little jewels for the eyeballs. But look up at the sky. This is what God made. You really think that little statue made this? The guy that made it has a cigarette hanging out of his mouth down the street in his shop. It's nothing. By the way, there's a word used in Jeremiah and a couple other passages in the prophets where the word used to describe idols can mean like dung pellets. So they were very critical of these idols. They're just dung. I mean, they're tough on them. In the 10 words, word 1, Jehovah forbids the making of a pesel, a hewn god, or an image, likeness of any form, the bowing down thereto and serving it. In the Bible, as well as other literary sources from the ancient Near East, we have clear examples of the making of these, as well as descriptions of how they're made and how they believe that they were bringing the Spirit of the God to dwell in this stone, wood, clay idol image. They chipped, they chopped, or they poured, but they're not living. They have no breath, or literally ruach, in them. They can't walk, they can't talk, they can't eat, and they cannot save you. If you need them to move, you have to move them. They're vanity, they're worthless, they're abominations, and they're dung. And they're forbidden. If a person who's listening to me today has any association of worshiping the one true God with an idol, you need to stop. It's forbidden. Now, you have no right to take somebody else's property. I want to make that clear. So if, I'm not going to be so literal in that. If the local churches have that, then you just don't go there. That's my opinion. But if you have them in your house, you might want to put them out by the road. These are physical objects. Physical objects. They represent divinity, and they are forbidden to make, to bow down to, and to serve. Again, why is that? Go back to Deuteronomy 4. This is how we can wrap things up. Deuteronomy 4, beginning in verse 12. And Jehovah spoke to you out of the midst of fire. You heard the voice of the words, but saw no form, only a voice. And he declared to you his covenant. And he commanded you to perform the 10 words, and he wrote them upon 2 tablets of stone. And Jehovah commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you might do them in the land into which you go over to possess it. Take therefore good heed to yourself, for you saw no manner of form on the day that Jehovah spoke to you in Horeb out of the midst of fire, lest you become corrupt and make a carved idol, a pestle, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female. Notice, I'm going to define this for you. So you don't have to say, well, could it mean this or could it mean that? Listen, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of a male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that's in the water beneath the earth, lest thou lift up your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars and the host of heaven, you should be misled to worship them and serve them, which Jehovah your God has allotted to all the nations under the whole heaven. But Jehovah has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be to him for a people of inheritance, as you are this day. Why is it forbidden to worship other gods made by the works of the hands of man? Because you saw nothing. You heard words only, words that were ultimately spoken from the midst of the fire on the day of assembly, and they were written on tablets of stone. Pestle is something which is hewn, chipped, chopped, shaped. 59 times it occurs in the Hebrew Bible. Now, please hear me. There are 2 exceptions to this. 59 times pestle is mentioned, and all but 2 have to do with idolatry. Remember, I tell you, it means to shape, to hew, to chip, to chop. Those 2 exceptions are as follows. Number 1, in 1 Kings 5:32, the root word pe samek lamed is used to describe the activity of craftsmen who were making a house of prayer. The craftsmen, remember, they're hewing to make what ultimately is a house of prayer. It's the only time it's used, talking about craftsmen making something other than an idol. It's interesting that it happens to be in 1 Kings 5:32. The other is very important, and I want to end with this. The other example that's not talking about idolatry, the other example of the use of pe samek lamed, the hewing of something that's not talking about idolatry, is used to describe the tablets upon which the 10 words are written. In Exodus chapter 34, verses 1 and 4, and Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 1 and 3, Moses is told to hew tablets, bring them to God, and God will write upon them his 10-word covenant. Just as the 2 tablets were hewn and thereby prepared for the finger of God to inscribe upon them his eternal covenant, may every stony heart spoken by the prophet be prepared for that final and future recovenanting in which God himself will inscribe upon prepared tablets of the heart his covenant. I want you to get that. The only other example that deals with hewing something other than an idol is described as the tablets. My prayer is that what the prophets describe as a stony heart, which needs to be transformed, it needs to be hewn. My prayer is that our hearts would be prepared for God to write his words upon them. Because at that point, in that new covenant, we will be free at last from the gods made by human hands. And that, I believe, will lead to a time when a new covenant people will assemble together in a house of prayer made without human hands. Shabbat Shalom. Join us next week for our next class in the 10 words.